folks. Welcome to another episode of 10 Laws with East Forest Podcast. This week, I have a conversation with Dustin DiPerna. He's someone that I met at the Esalen Institute when I was over there working on the group flow project that Mikey Siegel does. And Dustin was leading like the meditation portion, meaning like Mikey was using his, biofeedback group tech stuff so we could see our heartbeats and breath rate and doing all this sort of integrated, creative biotech, biohacking. And I was playing live music to that and interfacing with that system. And Dustin was leading guided meditations that we are also doing sort of at the same time or in this whole process. So he's a meditation teacher. He's an author. He's a cool dude. So it's just someone that I linked up with, and I instantly was like, wow, you've got a lot of great knowledge and life experience, and I'd be cool to share this with you guys. But before we get into that, I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Charles Eisenstein. Thanks again to Charles. I just got back from spending a night out in the wilderness here, and I really was, theoretically in my backyard because I can kind of see from my window here the area I went in the Grand Staircase National Monument. Actually, you know what? I don't even know if it's still the Grand Staircase National Monument, this area after what Trump did, but I'm pretty sure it still is. But it's like he changed the boundaries and that all happened. And people have been fighting it in court, but I'm not really sure when that goes. I think it was immediate. I don't know. But it's not like they handed us a map and we're like, here's the new boundaries. The old signs are still up. So that whole situation is not something I really want to get into right now. But well, I'll talk about it another time. It's heartbreaking. But I went out last night because it's been a while since I went out and just spent a night out on the land, and especially out here. And there's something really special about sleeping outside and waking up in the morning and being next to a river or in a canyon or wherever you are. It doesn't really matter. There's just a certain connection of sleeping on the ground. It's kind of like being barefoot from time to time. It's just something very human and something that feels important. And it wasn't easy all the time. Some of the hiking, I was trying to find my way and it was raining. I was thinking about flash floods for a second there. But all in all, I'm just proud that I take the time. I took this time just to get out. So I'm encouraging you to just do it. If you're feeling the urge or you're feeling a little disconnected, just go for a walk and try to get somewhere where there's some still natural things growing, things that weren't planted or too manicured. Get out to that places that are still wild, because that wilderness, it ignites something in you that's you too, right? We're really the same thing. So I'm coming from that energy. My body's a little sore, but in a good way. So let's see what's coming up. This weekend, I'll be at Santa Barbara, and I'll be in San Diego, and I'm doing a little private thing in Arizona. But Santa Barbara on the 8th, and San Diego, I believe, on the 12th. I'll be at Esalen in between that working, but that's just sort of like a programming private thing. But anyway, these events are both East Forest ceremony events in Santa Barbara and San Diego, and I'm really, really excited to have opportunities just to share this with the public. So if you know anybody in Southern California or you live in Southern California, please do come. You can find out info and tickets at eastforest.org/tour. We'll get right into this interview with Dustin, or more of a conversation. But please do review this podcast. Just scroll down there. 5-star reviews and comments make a big, big difference. And please, of course, say hi. Oh, someone did say hi. And I wanted to read what they said just because it was it was really nice. This is a review, 5-star review from Yogi Beers on iTunes. It says, I can't speak highly enough about this podcast. I'll read this. It's a little embarrassing. Trevor is so insightful and has interesting guests on the podcast. Yes, they are interesting. If you're into listening to conversations that go beyond the surface into consciousness, spirituality, and psychedelics, this is the podcast for you. Trevor also put out some really great guided meditations. Personally, this podcast is really meaningful as I connect with others on the podcast who have also had profound life-changing awakenings while using psychedelics. I love the music, the talks, the meditations, and just listening to the insights. So thanks, Yogi Bears. That makes a really big difference because, people will be cruising around checking out podcasts and when they read these, they just glance at a few reviews, it's what makes them pull the trigger or not to hit that little subscribe button or even just like listen to one or two. And we're just trying to plant new stories and new seeds in people's minds and just say, hey, there's maybe some of these conversations you're going to pick up a thing or two that will help you live a little more wisely, a little more well. And I hope the meditations do the same, or whatever else we can figure out to put out on 10 Laws with East Forest. So that's enough chitter chatter. Let's get to the banter between my friend Dustin DiPerna. Dustin, I'm excited. I'm excited to talk. I'm excited we're finally getting a chance to do this.
Me too. I'm grateful for your invitation.
So I can see you. You're in a glass house somewhere in Northern California. And you told me this was sort of like a sanctuary for you. Is this something you built, or was you lucky enough that was part of the house you're in?
No, I built it. I do most of my work from home and I see students here. And so I needed a place, I call it my temple, my sanctuary. I needed a place where I could meet with people in a really sort of relaxed and peaceful space. Was the connection bad? Is that why you're shaking your head?
No, it's fine. I'm just looking at your space and how amazing it is. Describe it for people who can't see it.
I realized, sure. So this is it's an all glass temple space made out of redwood and glass, and surrounded by nature. I'm in the middle of the woods in Northern California. The space itself is surrounded by bamboo. It's filled with some Tibetan iconography, some fur rugs, nice cozy chairs. And it really just provides a space for healing and transformation, right next to my home, which is what I really wanted desperately. And I was, I've thought about the symbology of wanting a glass house. It's like,
that's what I thought about.
My own aspirations for wanting just a transparent life. Like there's nothing hidden. I see this as like the opposite of a man cave. This is like my crystal see-through palace for all to see. There's nothing hidden. It's my own aspiration.
No one can throw stones at the glass house because how's the saying go? Because
those who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Something like that.
So you're the one who shouldn't be throwing stones.
I try not to throw stones. Yeah, exactly.
So tell me a little bit about
Trevor, let me also just say how grateful I am to be getting to know you, Trevor. I mean, you and I spent a long weekend together at Esalen Institute, and we were both serving this vision of how we can bring technology into a more sacred space. And I just want to say, right off the bat, how just really floored I was by your presence, your musical skill, your talent, the way that you shared and created transformative experiences for everybody who was on this retreat. So when you first asked me about this podcast, it was a no-brainer. I really felt a deep resonance with you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it was mutual getting to meet you too. I just saw that email from Mikey about possibly going back for something. So it's definitely I saw that last night and I'm having to think that through if I could make that happen.
Exactly. A whole month of September is available at Esalen for this kind of work for us.
I'm going to be there in June of 2019, I think it is, doing like a East Forest thing, like a deep dive into the music and inner space. So I'm excited.
Why don't we say a little bit about Esalen? Because I'm sure people listening to this podcast are interested in things you're doing there, interested in things I'm doing. What was your experience there? What was it like for you?
I'm going to kill this video, by the way. I might bring it back on just for bandwidth. Esalen, I thought, well, I'll tell you honestly, the thing that blew me the most was the landscape. I knew it'd be cool, but it was really, really stunning and beautiful. The way it hugs the cliff line in Big Sur there. I mean, the energy is incredible. And the hot tub baths I just was totally blown away about how they built them and how they're just like on the cliff, literally like midline on a cliff over the ocean. So I think it's mostly to me about the landscape there and also the history. I was really came to being in my own psychedelic mindset listening to a lot of Terence McKenna talks, and a lot of them were there. So you can really feel the history of progressive thought, out-of-the-box counterculture thought, and everything that happened there. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff I don't even know about that went down there, but you can feel it in the air.
Well, Iceland is really the home of, and the birthplace of human potential. And for those of us interested in exploring our own consciousness and the further reaches of what's possible, it's almost like a pilgrimage site. It's like a modern American pilgrimage site. And, you can feel it in what you're saying with both the history and the landscape. I have to say that Eslen's this perfect combination of truth, beauty, and goodness, to use Plato's words. And with truth, it's like this exploration of our deepest potential. What is reality? What's our own potential within that reality or as reality? Goodness, and that the intention there was to really serve the transformation of any person who walks onto the land. And beauty is obvious, just like what you were saying. It's like walk onto this land on the cliff sides of Big Sur, overlooking the vast expanse of the ocean. And you're left with a sense of awe and a sense of self-transcendence, sort of feeling your own smallness in the midst of the grandeur of the Pacific. So, it's a really special place. I hope everybody on this podcast has a chance to, at one point in time in their life, make that pilgrimage, the modern or postmodern Mecca of sorts.
Yeah, I've been telling most people I know that even if they don't have a plan or they're not even planning on going to a retreat there, they can still go. Someone was telling me, I don't know if this is true, that you can get a special pass to go there at night, like midnight to 6 a.m. just to use the tubs. It's some sort of really cheap pass or something.
Yeah, it's even, I think, more limited than that. I think it's like 1 to 3 a.m. or something. It's like really in the middle of the night. But yes, I've heard the same. It's on their website. People can check it out.
If you're camping in the area and you just want to experience those tubs for a few hours, I guess that is the minimum ask. But it's worth it. It is totally worth it to go there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was just wanted to just give some really short background on when you said the work you do with people. Like what is that work? Because I want to ask a few questions about. I know sort of you work a lot with meditation, but more specifically, how does that manifest in how you work with people?
Great. Do you mind, Jer, if I give a little bit of just like a bit of background? Because I think it'll help put what I do in context. Is that okay?
Of course. Yeah, whatever you want.
Yeah. So, just as far as context goes, I often say that over the past 30 years, we've really entered into a whole new era as a human species. And that, 100 years ago or a couple hundred years ago, if we grew up in China, we'd be exposed to Chinese culture for our whole life. If we grew up in the US, we'd be exposed to US culture for our whole life, etc. But over the past few decades, culture has really become global in a certain way. And as culture becomes global, so does the potential for wisdom and the potential for what it means to be a human being. And I've spent the past 20 years or so working with an American philosopher named Ken Wilber and something called integral theory, and also just doing my own deep practice and study of the world's great wisdom traditions and cultures to really try to answer the question, what does it mean to be fully human? How do we live into our fullest potential? What does it mean to be happy? What does it mean to be awake? What does it mean to be wise? And so in my exploration of those questions and my study with some really incredible mentors, I'm slowly making my way on that journey of trying to discover how do we live a meaningful and good life. And so along the way, in addition to studying with Ken Wilber, as I mentioned, I've been immersed pretty deeply within the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, and in particular the traditions called Mahamudra and Dzogchen. These are really just the practices that help lead one to a deeper sense of awakening or realization of their true nature. And as I was on that journey, what became obvious is that I was learning so many incredible things from mentors, and I had developed an incredible horizontal connection to peers. And that naturally what happened was that there were people who were asking for advice and perspective. And so in a really simple and organic way, I began sharing some of the things that I learned. So I was sharing meditation, I was sharing some of the practices and some of the conceptual, intellectual frameworks that have helped me along the way. And in doing that, it's grown into one of the things that I love doing most, which is sharing wisdom with other people, learning from other people, and really asking the deepest questions we can about what it means to be human. And I've been, now doing that for, quite some time, and it's ever rewarding, ever changing. And it's teaching me more and more about what it means to be a vulnerable human being in connection with others, which is, was a hard lesson for me to learn along the way. So
yeah,
it's a bit about what.
And how did you and Ken Wilber cross paths in the first place?
Oh man, that's such a beautiful question and a long, is a long journey. So I was early on in my life, I had these aspirations to have some sort of impact in the world. And, I wasn't exactly sure, what the right path would be for me. But at a certain point, I made this decision that, I was in my late teens, and I thought, for whatever reason, celebrities and supermodels had become the new idols and icons of our culture. And if I could have some sort of impact with this group, if I could encourage them to start getting interested in meditation and the transformation of consciousness, then, perhaps there'd be a trickle-down effect in society. So I moved to New York. I was working in the fashion industry with these folks. I moved to Paris. I was working in Paris. And after some time, I got pretty disillusioned. And my solo Herculean effort wasn't very successful. And I decided to go become a monk. It was like the opposite extreme. I think I'm an extremist by nature. And I moved to India to be a monk for a while. And that also was too extreme. And so having been disillusioned with the world of fashion and potential cultural change at that level, having been disillusioned with the world of being a monk and a total renunciate, waking up at 4 a.m. and meditating and practicing, recognizing that there was something extreme about that, I said, there has to be a middle way. There's got to be something in between. And by that time, I was reading Ken Wilber's work, and I made this choice that I wrote him a letter just saying, hey, I told him my story, and I said, I want to come work with you. I want to come spend time with you. And at that time, he didn't write me back, but one of his co-colleagues did, and invited me to come to Boulder. And that started a really beautiful journey and a beautiful friendship. I worked there for quite a few years and developed a really close relationship with Ken, and I still have it. I feel very, very fortunate for that relationship.
So you were essentially working with techniques developed for going into caves and working with these really old techniques developed by men a long time ago. And what about that what part of that sort of ancient technology played a role in the disillusionment of you trying to figure out how to walk the walk in this modern world? I mean, for some people, It's great to kind of to drop out. But that's something I was thinking about how some of these techniques were developed for sort of like a very specific form of living at a very specific time by very specific people.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that. I think it's a great question. So the first thing I'll say is that it was not the techniques that felt limited. It was the ways in which I found it to be expressed through particular cultural matrix. So moving to India and living as a monk in India, I recognized that the culture that I was embedded in there, in this particular monastery or ashram, was very limited. It was limited in the sense that it was traditional, where there wasn't a lot of critical thinking. and there wasn't a lot of reflection about other modes of being or what was happening in the rest of the world. It was more of a sense that people had externalized their own inner authority to the culture and to the teacher, and there just wasn't a lot of self-reflection. And having grown up in the West, I was raised with a deep sense of critical thinking and a sense of reflection that didn't allow me to sort of outsource my own authority. So that's the first piece, is there was a cultural conflict. It wasn't a technique or technology conflict. And so when I realized that, I recognized that I needed to be within sort of a modern or postmodern context and culture I was raised in. And I needed to do that in a way that I could both learn within that culture and apply these techniques and technologies in a way that could be applicable to other people who were in a similar cultural context. And that's really been the journey that I've been on, is helping to translate some of these ancient technologies, as you said, that were originally done in caves, into a context that makes them accessible for others. And the only reason I have any qualities or capacity to do that is because I've had to, take that hard path of doing it myself. I've had to really lead and explore by example of how can we make this work and how to make it work in our own cultural context. So that was the journey, and it's something that I'm still on, and it's something that, I think that you and I share in a certain way, because from the conversations we've had, there's a deep passion and a deep way in which these ancient traditions have influenced you. Yet here you are translating those teachings, those practices, those realizations through your music in a contemporary context. And we're what Ram Dass calls Gnostic intermediaries. We're intermediaries between this Gnostic world of profound depth and meaning in our modern culture.
What do you feel are the biggest hindering blocks to people working? I mean, in some level, I feel that there's so much information now and so many experiences to experience that we can drop into things of really any modality, but on a pretty light level, whether it's like just a YouTube video or a quick workshop might be a little of a deeper dive, or a podcast or a book. And so people have all these infinite options and choices and all of history's modalities that they can sort of build their own experience through. Do you find that to be a trap, or do you find that to be a resource to sort of build your own religion?
Yeah, almost always with these either or questions, it's a little bit of both. Obviously the resource that we have at our fingertips, the fact that we can have access to these great lineages of transformation that have been, in a lot of ways kept secret for hundreds or thousands of years. I mean, that's amazing. But just as you say, there's a way in which sometimes we are so overwhelmed that we can't make sense of it. And I'd say the most important thing for people to start with is some sort of conceptual map to try to make sense of all the content out there. I have a friend who once used this phrase that we're in a content obese era. Like, we have so much content that we don't know what is the healthiest or the best to consume. And so there's something about these maps or these conceptual frameworks, like the ones we get from integral theory and the work that Ken Wilber does, that really helps us to make sense of the growing sets of details and information. And I'd be happy. I mean, it might be fun to go into some of that. Like, what are the best pieces of content? How do we make sense of things with a comprehensive framework?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially, you can just tell me what sort of turns you on the most lately or as of the past.
Sure. So, one of the frameworks that has become really helpful, and I'm just going to share one of the basics because this is something that allows us just sort of a starting point, and we can take this into so much granularity and detail. But it's a basic framework that Ken Wilber and I call wake up, grow up, clean up, show up. And I'll just take a moment to break down each of those pieces, because it's when we understand that each of these domains is important that we can start to make sense of all of the content, at least in these first couple categories. So wake up, grow up, clean up, show up. So when we look at the world's great religious and spiritual wisdom traditions, many of them point to the fact that it's possible to have a fundamental shift in our basis of identity, a fundamental shift in who we say and think and know and feel that we are. And that's a shift in which we move from a more relative sense of self, or a small self, to a universal self. And we move from a contracted egoic point of view to a point of view that's boundless. It's a boundless whole of infinite awareness that's deeply interconnected with everything and everyone that arises. And that shift is one that results in a deep sense of freedom, a sense of liberation, and a sense of deep care for everyone and everything. And so the first category, when we take this broad look across cultures that we think is really important, is this category of waking up, or shifting from a relative small self to a big self, capital S self. So that's waking up, and we can look at that across traditions, across cultures, and we can look at it with much more nuance. And most of the meditative traditions focus on that fundamental shift of waking up, or enlightenment. The second category, which is called growing up, really comes from Western psych. So when we look at the traditions of developmental psychology, we look at someone like James Fowler's work on spiritual intelligence, or Jean Piaget's work on cognitive development, or Kohlberg's work on moral development, what we see is that human beings can develop through stages of continued evolution. And for a long time, we used to think that people would grow up until about 12 years old, and then basically they'd stop their development. But what's become very clear over the past almost 5 decades is that humans can continue to develop into adulthood, into much more advanced levels of being. So these worldviews that sometimes are described in systems like spiral dynamics, or in something like Wilber's stages or structures of human development, these really show us that there are these potentials for growing up that many of us aren't ever exposed to. So growing up is a second dimension, and growing up is important because when we start to examine the world's problems, we understand that there's a lot of complexity there. And what's often the case is that we aren't at levels or worldviews of adult maturity that can actually handle or address the problems that we're facing. So when we grow up, we increase our level to handle complexity, and we increase our spheres of care and concern. We move from egocentric to ethnocentric to world-centric to cosmocentric. And these stages are really vital. So this is the second domain of growing up. And then the third domain is something we call cleaning up. And this is vital, because cleaning up is really that dimension of shadow work, or healing and integration, where we begin to come into contact with our own trauma and our own wounds. And by healing or integrating, what we're doing is we're not just setting things right in our own lives, but there's an intergenerational piece to this, where we're actually healing the karma or the trauma that's been passed down through generations. And if we do the work ourselves, we don't pass it on to others or to family or to those around us. So it allows us to show up in the most loving and considerate and connected way, because we're not acting from trauma, but we're responding from this deep sense of care and connection. So that level of boundless healing, or that dimension of boundless healing, is the third category we call cleaning up. And then finally, and then sorry for this, sort of lengthy exposition, but it's sometimes useful.
Yeah.
The fourth category that we talk about is showing up, in that we're not just doing this work of waking up, growing up, and cleaning up. We're not just doing it for ourselves. We're doing this so we can show up in the world, and we can have impact. So we can show up in the world and really make a difference in policy, or the systems that we're embedded in, or the simple lives of others. So showing up with meaning and purpose and impact across all domains of life really becomes the intention, that our intention is to have a positive impact and toward the greater social good. So as a general framework, this wake up, grow up, clean up, show up, helps to make sense of some of the content out there. What we often say is that if you're missing any one of these categories, you probably don't have an integral approach or holistic approach to your own practice and your own life and your own transformation. And, I think an intelligent practitioner today would want to at least be aware of these categories, and then might search out what are the best practices and the best tools and the best teachers and mentors who can really help guide me through each of these domains to live a holistic life. And of course, there's other categories that we might want to speak about. There's social dimensions. There's, nutrition and body dimensions. The whole realm of embodiment is critical. But, these are all cross sections to those four main categories.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's not always a linear path. Like, it's something that we go in and out of all these different stages, and we're really just these spiritual beings in these meat bodies that have to deal with not just what it means, these existential questions to be alive and how to live, but then we get hungry and we have chores to do, and you have to go to the bathroom and you have to brush your teeth every day, and then things happen in the world. And I think what's interesting is that the will can be there, and the will is sort of something that I like to think, at least, that we're responsible for. I guess there's some debate over that too, but that's a deeper conversation. But nonetheless, it feels, from my own experience, that the environment or your meat body, your mind, can fall into depression, whether that's a form of chemical depression or environmental or a mixture thereof, sort of a perfect storm, if you would, that can push your life like the ocean waves going this way or that way. And it's sort of like riding these waves of highs and lows. And what do you think about the role of feeling blue, feeling down, working through the muck when you have the will to work through these processes and work with teachers and new ideas, and you want to be on your path? But what do you say to people when they're really in the fog of feeling down?
Yeah, great question. I want to speak to you on two different levels, and maybe we can even just explore it together a bit. And the first level is just on the level of heart, and that's that, anybody who might be feeling that right now, as they're listening to this podcast, just knowing that first and foremost, it's perfectly okay to feel whatever you're feeling. That there's no need to try to move away from or to try to deny the fact that you might be feeling something. But coming into contact with your own sadness or your own depression or your own brokenness is so important. It's been a journey that I've had to, find my way through. There's a saying that we sometimes use called spiritual bypassing, and sometimes people on the spiritual path sort of bypass these difficult or sad or depressive aspects of being. And so the first thing is just to feel okay with that, and to know that, you're not alone. It's part of the human experience, and that, there are others that we can share these experiences with, and through community, there's a way through. Not a way beyond, but a way through, and that's, I think, important. And then the second just level that I think is worth mentioning is just the level of conceptual frameworks. I've spent some time now teaching at Stanford, and in teaching at Stanford, we introduced this idea of human flourishing. And human flourishing is based on the work of a guy named Keyes out of Emory, and he's got something that he calls a two continuum model. And if you just imagine a horizontal graph, and at one end of that graph, we have a sense of feeling that he calls it mental illness, but let's just call it, there's a sense that we have unintegrated trauma in our bodies and in our lives, and we have these negative states that are arising. And on the other end of that graph, the horizontal graph, imagine that we have a life free of those. So we have a life free of mental illness or no negative states. But then he says, that's the domain that most psychological work is focused on for the past 100 years or so. But there's this whole other category of what it means to be human, and that's a vertical domain. It's a vertical vector. So instead of the horizontal vector that moves from no mental illness or mental illness to no mental illness, there's a vertical vector that moves from languishing to flourishing. And that the reason this is important is because you can be anywhere in those vectors. You could have a sense of depression, but you might still be flourishing in life. By flourishing, we mean that you're living a life of deep meaning and purpose and contribution. You have positive social relationships, that you're engaging in a way that has impact. And so even if you have a sense of this depressive state that comes up for you, or a sense of sadness, it doesn't mean that you can't also be living a life that has meaning, purpose, and contribution. And the reason this work is such a breakthrough is because we find that the biggest majority of the adult population, at least in the US, is maybe not suffering from a sense of depression, but they're suffering from a sense of languishing. So that means that they might not have necessarily what would be considered sort of mental illness, but they don't have meaning, they don't have purpose, they don't have strong social connections, they don't have a way that they feel like they're giving back and they're contributing. And that's a big deal. So a lot of the stuff that we're doing at Stanford in the wellness education program is to help people live a flourishing life, even if, and even in spite of negative states. And I think one last thing I'll say about that is that the founder of this particular 2 continuum model, Keyes is his name, he says, I suffer from clinical depression. There are days when I can't get out of bed, yet I'm living a flourishing life. Like I'm contributing something, I'm doing something meaningful, I have good relationships. And so I just say that, learning a bit more about what it means to be human in these different domains of human well-being, whether it's languishing or flourishing, all this is useful, and all this is now available to us. And we can start synthesizing the very best of East and West and ancient and modern wisdom.
Well, I like that idea of a continuum and something that's a co-current, as opposed to more of a binary approach where you're either one or the other. You're happy or you're sad, so to speak. I also tend to think that we have sort of it's unique in modern life that we're not challenged as much as maybe we were historically as humans. And we're coddled with information and riches, even just having so much food. And I don't know, I wonder if you could argue that depression is also a modern affliction, one of affluence, or just even being on the spiritual path is pretty much because you have the time or the resources to start thinking about these things. And it's just an interesting idea, because I know it's not to say that suffering, like having like all these hardships, is a distraction, but perhaps it just gives you context for what it means to be human, to be alive.
It totally, brother. I once heard a teacher say that there are 2 people who enter onto the spiritual path. There are those who have nothing and are so desperate that that's the only choice they have, is to turn to spirituality. And the other group of people are the group of people who have everything. Mm-hmm. And they realize that they're still unhappy. And so, I've reduced this down to this very simplistic teaching of, the path of privilege and the path of pain. And on each of those paths, we can find our way onto into the world of spirituality. But it's that group in the middle. It's that group that thinks, they generally are feeling okay. There's generally enough to eat. There's generally enough, satisfaction in life, that there's a sort of subtle level of unease that's always in the background that they don't even notice. So it's that group in the middle that I'm more worried about, not so much the people on the path of privilege or the path of pain, because I think that those people tend to turn towards spirituality. But it's also worth noting, because I know you have a connection to the deep wisdom of India. There was a teaching in India called the Purusharthas, and this is a teaching about the aims of life. And, I think it's very connected to what you were just talking about, in that they say that the average human being naturally progresses through these aims. And, these probably aren't linear, like you were saying earlier, but it's fun to sometimes think about them in a very natural and linear way. And that we start off life thinking that ultimate happiness lies in pleasure, like sense pleasure. We think about like good foods or amazing sensual or sexual experiences or comfortable environments. That's where we start. But then we start to have some of those experiences, and with a bit of wisdom, we realize, wow, like that didn't do it for me. There's still like this yearning for something more. And so that's called kama in the Purusharthas. The second level is the level of artha, which is the level of pursuit of money or power. We see this in our modern culture. It's like once people have had sort of all the sense of pleasures gratified, there's like, oh no, it must be, if I'm more powerful, if I accumulate as much money as possible, as much influence as possible, then I'll be happy. But of course, people who pursue that aren't any happier than anybody else, at least to a certain degree. And they say, okay, there must be something else. And so this Hindu aim of life says the third aim of life then becomes dharma, or a sense of contribution to the greater society. If we translate that into modern context, it's like people then turning towards giving back and philanthropy and making an impact in a positive way, doing positive social change, so human rights work, etc. And what ends up happening, even at that particular stage, is that it's certainly fulfilling and it feels good to give back, but it's not ultimate satisfaction. Sometimes people in this category end up getting burnt out. And so this great Vedic wisdom, this yogic wisdom says that it's only then that you turn towards moksha or liberation or spiritual realization, recognizing that that is the only thing that can bring lasting or everlasting happiness. And I think to your first point, we live in a culture in which, you're right, there's like this pursuit of sense pleasure or experiences, or there's a pursuit of money and power and prestige and sort of the capitalistic values that are so around us. And, some of us are interested in giving back and interested in contributing to the greater social good. But all of those still are relative when compared to ultimate happiness of true spiritual liberation. And, it's not to say that any of those need to go away. We can pursue spiritual liberation while also giving back, while also, accumulating the right livelihood and the right amount of influence and money. And we can also have, delicious experiences. It's that our priorities are straight. And in our culture, that when we don't have anybody helping to outline these stages of life for us, or these aims of life, it's sometimes difficult to make sense of it. So, it's all about learning. There's so much we can learn from the wisdom of ancient times and bring that into the current context.
Yeah. What role do you think, I heard someone say the other day, they took some kind of, I think it was Hamilton Morris on a podcast, who's the Vice guy, and he was talking about some drug he took. I've never heard of it, some obscure drug for sleep, but he took way too much and it pushed him into this realm where it's quite challenging, but basically he had a recognition in his mind that the only true consciousness was death or sleep. And I started to think about all this searching we all do, whether we know it or not, sort of as you're saying, certain relative to the awakening or awareness that we have, to be reunited with our oneness, to be reunited with God, to be reunited with the source of our becoming. And we're all flailing in a sense to do that, some with more fancy techniques than another. And perhaps it's all just sort of a running in spirals or circles inside this binary consciousness that we're in, and we're always trying to get into non-duality, non-consciousness, where maybe we start to tap into that with sleep or even death, where we finally find perhaps what we're looking for. But what role for yourself, or do you think sort of psychedelics as sort of a plant medicine has played or can play as a tool to show us something, to teach us something, or to help us have a felt experience perhaps of some of these states that you're talking about?
Great. Well, if we look at just a broad swath of human cultures, there's a huge portion of those cultures and these ancient wisdom traditions that participated in the use of entheogenic, plants or other forms. And my sense is that they can be incredibly powerful as on-ramps and as introductions. And I think, when I use that framework of wake up, grow up, clean up, show up, I often articulate the use of psychedelics or entheogens within the category of waking up and cleaning up, but more specifically cleaning up. Let me say why. So when we work with something like, say, psilocybin, or we work with something like ayahuasca, it's true that there can be a fundamental shift in identity. There can be a sense of awakening. It's temporary. It's very possible that can happen. But if we really start to examine what the, I think, more useful long-term benefit is that when we work with entheogens like this, what happens is that we gain access to all kinds of domains of our psyche, our own shadow, our own unconscious, that otherwise aren't accessible. And it's in these places of our own psyche that we store karma, and that we store our own past experiences of trauma. And if, in fact, we can work with these psychedelics in such a way that it allow us to liberate, reintegrate, or heal these aspects of ourselves, then it's serving our own evolution. It's like we have more fuel for our further growth. And I think that can be really positive. But one of the things that I often say, and I know that many others hold this perspective as well, that I think the use of psychedelics is best done in conjunction with a practice of meditation and or yoga, something that allows you to endogenously produce these positive states, that produce them on your own without any sort of external stimulus. But when done in conjunction, when psychedelics are done with a steady and regular meditation practice in community or with the guidance of a lineage or teacher, I think it's unbelievable the transformative power they have. But just need to be done in the most intelligent way possible.
Yeah, from my own experience and from anecdotal experience, I think having some form of practice, meditation or breathing, and in combination with the actual psychedelic experience is sort of the doorway to the really deeper layers of the teachings and the experience itself. I mean, it was a profound experience for me of just recognizing what the breath actually was. I mean, it's sort of stuff you read about and hear about all the time in yogic philosophy or all over the place, the prana. But I actually got to have a felt experience of what that meant before I even knew what that meant. And I always think felt experiences are 1,000,000 times more powerful than anything you intellectualize or read about or are told. I mean, that's really where the learning is. You can't argue with it. Yeah.
Would you be willing to share a bit about how that's impacted you in your life, the felt or learned experience? I'm just curious if your viewers know much about your own sort of experience versus the conceptual frameworks you might talk about.
Well, I've spoken about the psychedelic aspect for me, but I mean, just in a larger sense, everything, the meat of the soup is just sort of experiencing your life, which for me is just one giant felt experience. It's how I feel it. It's sort of the emotional content that comes up, as opposed to the historical markers of what actually happens to me in the world. It's sort of how I navigate that, and how I feel about it is the laboratory of what it means to be alive. And I don't know, I've always sort of had this existential crisis or how did you call it before? It wasn't like you're depressed, but it's more like a low
languishing.
Level. Languishing. Yeah, I definitely feel like I've languished. I mean, I've had some definite periods of depression for sure, but there's kind of an ongoing. I don't want to say I'm a pessimist. I want to feel that I'm an optimist, but I feel that I have to work with something in my mind that says it's work. Like it's work to be here. And that's something that I think has a lot to do with just how I grew up as a child and how I was taught how to look at the world from my parents and so forth. And just all the sort of perfect nuance of what it means to be incarnated for me in this particular trip that I'm in. But I'd say if I had to sum up all of my efforts and all of my approaches, including the music and the work I do, it's sort of trying to cultivate a feeling deep down, there's that candle flame all the time of agape consciousness, of brotherly love, of knowing that eternalness of what it all is. And without that sense of mindfulness that I've probably experienced from a few unique psychedelic moments and also heightened moments of existence in my life, where whether they're highly pleasurable or highly painful, that it's sort of like an electrified sense of the current of consciousness that you can't be in all the time. It's too intense. It's just like you'll fry out, you'll burn out. But that you touch into these waters to be like, oh, that's me too, and that's part of me all the time. And it's very, very humbling, but it's also, it's beyond, I don't even know how to describe it. It's just sort of that God consciousness that's part of all of us at the same time. And so it's on one hand, perhaps trying to get back to that, but it's also trying to cultivate that. And it's also, as you spoke about, this living with something concurrently at the same time, where we feel that, and then I also feel grumpy. Or whatever it is. It's it's hungry or whatever. All the animalistic things. We're animals too, and that's what's so crazy about being human. Is we have this spectrum of beingness from the lowest. We share rock consciousness. We share the earthly, just physical matter consciousness, and all these layers of octaves of consciousness through the plant, through the animal kingdom, through our ability to be self-aware, and through our ability to have cosmic consciousness. And it all exists at once, which is, I think, what makes humans so incredible. And even with that, we can have things like the ability to have this conversation and be self-aware and kick around crazy ideas and then write music and create art and have comedy and a sense of humor. All these things are just so absurd. And then on the face of that, we have all this animal stuff, like our sexual desires, and just the fact that we have to go to sleep every night is just crazy. Or that we have to eat every few hours. It seems impossible almost to if you told me that's the gig that we're signing up for, I'm like, that sounds like what a load of work, that we have to input food constantly and take craps, and we have to get jobs. And so anyway, my experience is one of sort of this strange self-awareness of just trying to keep all that in balance. And so I think where I've been at lately in the last few years is just trying to see all of that at once. It's being an act of service, being kind to myself, being kind and honest with others. And it just comes down to those basics of just telling the truth. And that alone is hard enough, and just speaking the truth. And so I think this podcast and my music and my work and the relationships I have in my life, I'm really just trying to find my own way through and kick around these ideas. That's why I want to talk to you and other people. It's just to it's sort of like clearing out the cobwebs and looking in the shadows and saying, is it this? Is it that? And maybe the answer is it's everything. But the felt experience, I think, to get back to your original question, is everything. Because there is nothing else. And that's really where the pudding is just what it means for you to be alive, to look out of these eyes and connect that mind and heart. And that's something I wanted to ask you about, was the mind and the heart. That's something you hear kicked around a lot, bandied about as this sort of cute concept. But there is this idea of this heart consciousness, this heart knowledge, this heart knowing, sort of your intuition. And then obviously our mind, or the little mind and the big mind that I've heard spoken about in Lakota traditions. Or can you speak a little bit about that for yourself, or in some of these traditions, or ways of connecting the two or working with the two, or maybe not looking at it so binary?
Yeah, please. I'd love to. So, I'll speak from my experience, because I think that's the best way. And as you're saying, is that, I personally took a path where I think I was always sort of a heartfelt guy. When I was young, I'd lie in bed and I'd just I didn't have any context for prayer, and I wasn't raised in a spiritual religious family, but I'd lie in bed at night and just give thanks for everything in my life and wish the people around me were healthy and happy. And so there's sort of a sense of heart connection that I really feel was part of the somatic fabric of my being, But I want to just say something about how I've experienced the process of deepening along the spiritual journey. And that's that I really experienced this, first levels of awakening being awakening of the mind, and coming to directly know and see and realize what you were pointing to, which is the sort of inseparability, or the non-duality of reality, that the awareness that seems to be in here and everything that seems to be happening out there is actually the same, that there's this a thread of continuity between what seems to be inside and outside, or the awareness and that which is witnessed. That in itself is amazing. It's the miracle of that level of sort of mind realization it's just so beautiful. And I found that as that deepened in my own practice, there is a way in which that realization moved from the head into my heart. It moved into a deep trust and a deep connection with everyone and everything, sense of care, a sense of just wanting everybody to be happy to share this experience, wanting everything to be free from, pains and sorrows. So there was a way in which that realization moved from the clear light of the mind to the clear light of the heart. So it really dropped into my heart. And I'll say that, continues even further, and that as it deepens and continues to progress, there's a way in which that clear light of the heart drops into the clear light of the body. It really drops into my base. And there's a way in which I feel my body and my gestures and my movement, and the ways that I eat food, the ways that I touch other people, the ways that I'm showing up in my being, in my body. I find that to be now like this really profound level of integration and connection. And so there's like a way in which there's a descent from head to heart to body, and without it being linear, there's a way in which all of these begin to really flourish and come online and become part of the integrated whole of the spiritual path. And, that was my path, but I know other people who start with the body. They enter through the gateway of the body. They find this body as something that's like, they're so amazed by this experience of being in a physical body that becomes their doorway. Or there's other people who just enter through the heart, like that is their gateway through love, through connection, through devotion. And all these are gateways, but what I do think happens is that there's a rounding out on the spiritual path, that there's a rounding out of this mind, of this heart, of this body, as an integrated or seamlessness begins to unfold. And to me, that's aspirational. That's so exciting. That means that nothing is left out on the spiritual path, that everything becomes included. And I think that was one of my biggest blocks along the way, is I thought that I'd have to give up everything. I thought that I'd have to give up my love for my wife, for example, or my children, or I thought that I'd have to give up this amazing experience of being embodied. And it turns out that along the spiritual journey, everything's included.
Everything. Yeah.
Yeah, everything. Yet none of it's yours, because there's really a sense of transcendence that also knows that everything's everyone's. And you can rest in that knowing and that comfort and that ease of being everything, and in that way having everything without a haver. So it's been such a sweet journey, brother.
I like the idea of the sacredness of the mundane. The idea that everything is part of the experience. Everything is holy, and the small little actions are just as sacred as the ones that are bigger. And it's sort of like when your whole life becomes a walking meditation of sorts.
Yeah, the Tibetans call that mixing practice or blending practice, where you blend the depths of the realization with everyday activities. And, for me, one of the biggest stumbling blocks on my journey is one that sort of had these aspirations or these ambitions for these grandiose visions of impact. And it's been so amazing to just watch those, sort of dissolve or go up in smoke, and recognizing that the simplicity of just kindness, like you were saying, being truthful, being kind, showing up in a way moment to moment that has impact, that's equally as important as some sort of large-scale impact. And that's where the deepening has really occurred in my life, and the part of where the deepening is still occurring, because I find myself sometimes trapped in those conceptual frames and need to bring myself back home.
It's like giving up the answers, living in the question becomes more of like the realization of the mystery being the thing that is the seat of your consciousness as opposed to the destination.
Yeah, and recognizing in that way, in the mystery, that there's a violence and certainty. Like I recognize that I spent so much of my life, even around spiritual content, spiritual ideas, so certain about things and how violent that is. And coming into that innocence and the softness of the mystery of the question, as you're referring to it, it's really sacred to be in that space of curiosity, innocence, vulnerability.
Yeah, I think that's why things like mystic poetry or music or art are some of the best ways to see representations of this stuff, as opposed to you think about things like the Ten Commandments, and it's I understand sort of where that's coming from as a way of like, let's just distill this down. Let's forget all the concepts. We're just going to give some folks some rules. And we won't even really explain like what's behind it, but at least that'll get them going. And I'm sure this is a whole nother conversation we'll have to get into another time about religious teachings and how they've been translated and mutated and so forth. But I think these days there's so much information out there, and we all have the ability to make choices. And it really comes down to that uncertainty and the fluidity of just your day-to-day experience and learning about what it means to be kind, to be truthful, to be loving, and making choices from a place like that. But Dustin, before we wrap up, I don't know if you'd be willing to, but we did so many short, little, wonderful, concise meditations at Edison, and it'd be really kind of nice as a way to end, to maybe if you could guide us through one of your choosing.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Sure. Like 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 10 minutes. What's your hope?
How about 5 or ish?
Yeah. I'd be happy to do that. Sure. So, if everybody listening, if you could just find a place where you can sit, but have your body supported. If sitting isn't possible for you, you can lie down, or you can stand up. But the ideal position is that your body feels supported. So you want to be supported by the earth. And the second piece I'll say about posture is just that you want your body to feel upright and alert, yet soft and innocent. So upright and alert, but you're not holding any tension, not holding anything too tight. You're letting the whole front of your body be open, receptive. And then just take a moment to relax any tension in your jaw. And relax the space between your eyebrows. And for this meditation, you can close your eyes. And start with just a gentle scan of your body. So softening the muscles of your face, softening your neck, your throat and shoulders. And softening your arms, just relaxing. And relaxing down through your wrists, your hands and fingertips. Just soft and relaxed. And moving down through your chest, your shoulder blades. Just feeling your whole torso relaxing, softening. Just resting through the lower back, the belly, the hips. And softening, relaxing your genitals, your thighs. The muscles in your legs just beginning to soften, relaxing your kneecaps, your calves, your shins. And relaxing your feet, tops of your feet, relaxing your toes and your toenails, and relaxing the soles of your feet. And whether you're lying or sitting or standing, just feeling yourself now resting into the earth. Just resting your whole body into the earth. feeling your body as a whole, just calm and peaceful. Feeling the whole body all at once. And now just visualizing all the cells of your body, millions and billions of cells in your body, full of light. It's as if all of the cells of your body are like miniature stars or suns. And just feeling that sense of radiant light from every cell in your body. As if that light has a deep sense of healing, and a deep sense of positive well-being that emanates from every single cell. Like your body has become a galaxy of radiating suns or starlight. And feeling your whole body bright, calm, and full of deep healing and well-being, as every cell radiates with light. Millions and billions of points of light. Like a galaxy. And then finally, imagine that sense of healing, calm, positive energy is radiating and touching every being, everywhere. Like you're sending a rain of blessings, a rain of blessing light on every being everywhere, wishing them well. May they be free from suffering. May every being be saturated in this beautiful light of unconditional love. And may every being come to know their true nature as the unbounded wholeness and unconditional love. And then just take a deep inhale in and exhale out. And you can relax your meditation posture, open your eyes, and bring the meditation to a close.
I dig it. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
That's perfect.
Connect with you.
Yeah. Well, in this cosmic state of consciousness, how can people find you before I close this? I will link to you in the show notes here right below it.
Yeah, DustinDiPerna.com is the best way to find me. I'm teaching at Esalen this December. I think it's 7th, 8th, and 9th, whatever that weekend is. People are welcome to join. That's a meditation retreat. And always doing stuff here in California. I'm teaching in China quite a bit, so would love people to stay in touch.
Dustin, DiPerna, DiPerna.
That's right.
All right.
Dustin.
Well, like I said, I'll link to that. But man, there's so many things I wanted to get into about like religion and all sorts of weird concepts. So maybe we'll do this again sometime and get into some other stuff.
I'd love that. Thank you, Krishna, Trevor, East Forest.
Thanks, buddy. Well, there it is. Thank you, Dustin, for talking to us. Always a pleasure, and I know there will be more. This music that you're hearing in the background is called Samana, and it's from the album Prana, which are 5 songs that they're actually recorded live on the winter solstice of 2012, which was a very fabled night that we all were waiting for our galactic activations. But then I think we woke up the next morning and realized, I think that's like kind of a generational thing. You know, it's like we're going through everything that was sort of bandied about, but it's just something that happens in time. You can see it all happening, right? The great galactic change is it's right here. It's just these transitions are happening in every direction, anything from climate change to what you find going on inside yourself. So thank you so much for listening. Check out eastforest.org for these tour dates this weekend and next week in Southern California. I'm East Forest. I'll catch you soon. Keep walking your walk. Don't take any shit, but if you do, do it with grace.